Today, the video game business is bigger than Hollywood, worth some $20 billion a year.
So where did video games come from? And how did they manage to take over the world? How did we get to this from this? Computers have been around for a good 20 years before anyone discovered what they'd really been put on the earth to do.
Play games. These prehistoric blips represent mankind's first attempts at creating computer games. Bouncing balls appear to have been popular with the programmers. The world's first fully evolved game wouldn't appear until 1961. America elected its youngest ever president, John F. Kennedy, amid the swirling skirts of rock and roll, the hula hoop, and the chill of the Cold War. Computers were the size of small houses, but cost a lot more. These massive mainframes went for hundreds of thousands of dollars, even then, millions today. Used by lab-coated university scientists and military boffins as expensive calculators, they were only meant to do big sums for serious people.
However, in the autumn of 1961, one young man, Steve Russell, a 24-year-old engineer, did. However, it wasn't quite what they'd imagined. He invented this: Space War.
In the early 60s, America was obsessed with space exploration. Computers were playing a vital role in the race to beat Russia to the moon, so it's hardly surprising that the world's very first computer game put university nerds at the thrusters of their very own spaceship.
People didn't appreciate what maneuvering a spaceship in space is like, and so I wanted to make it realistic.
Space War was a two-player game. The aim was to destroy your opponent before he, and of course it always was a he, destroyed you. An idea which has been used once or twice since then. Bushnell was a video engineer with a vision. He happened to have spent his university holidays working in a pinball arcade. He realised if you put a video screen in a wooden box, you could make a video game. In 1971, he knocked up the world's first video arcade cabinet in his daughter's bedroom, Computer Space. Engineers may have liked it, but most of the 1,500 machines produced were installed in bars where, despite its amazing, Computer Space's fatal flaw was exposed. It was too complicated to play if you were drunk. Nolan had no financial backing, so he used every trick in the book to get Al to make Pong as cheap as possible.
Nolan asked me to design a video game that he told me he had a contract from General Electric for a home game, which I believed. He described this game he described Pong, a spot and a score and paddles and sound, and it had to be very cheap to meet the consumer requirements, and I went ahead and did that.
Discover Atari. And discover how far you can go.
Atari went pretty far. Starting with handfuls of quarters in Al's bread tin, it went on to become the Microsoft of the 1970s. It expanded massively throughout the decade, and in 1977, Warner Brothers bought Nolan Bushnell out. His initial $250 investment cost them some $30 million.
The spark of imagination moved on. The next big leap in video games was to come not from here, Silicon Valley, but from a country with a gaming tradition going back hundreds of years. From here, Tokyo, where in 1978, Tomohiro Nishikado wrote a game that would change the way a generation would spend their spare time.
Space Invaders took Japan by storm. It combined the space theme of Western arcade games with a classic plot from Japanese creature feature B-movies. Overnight, Japan came to a standstill, or rather a sit-still. The only time anyone in Tokyo stood up was to hit the dance floor when the cash-in single Disco Invader was playing on the jukebox.
Invader's success was due to several new ideas which would set the benchmark for all future video games, such as the adoption of the concept of a high score, the idea of progress in destroying successive waves. But perhaps most importantly, Invaders was the first video game to feature fully animated characters. The invaders seemed real. People could believe they were really saving the Earth. Space Invaders was a worldwide hit. Alongside Asteroids, 1980 saw the introduction of further groundbreaking arcade games. Williams released Defender, written by Eugene Jarvis, which devoured $1.5 billion in quarters during its lifetime. Atari launched Missile Command by Dave Steerer, and Battlezone by Ed Rotberg. It really was the high watermark for arcade games in the US. Never again would these American machines be produced in such high numbers.
The early 80s also marked the peak in popularity of the American home console. Magnavox's Odyssey had been the world's first in 1972, but it was Atari's Video Computer System, or VCS, that came to sit in every American teenage boy's bedroom, alongside a baseball mitt and a well-thumbed copy of Hustler. In 1980, the sale of these consoles alone made Atari around $250 million.
The Japanese, meanwhile, looked elsewhere for inspiration. In early 1980, Toru Iwatani, a young Namco programmer, found his big idea inside a pizza box. The story goes that Toru had been working on Puckman for Namco for a while. It was a maze chase game based on a Japanese nursery rhyme about a small creature that gobbles up all evil things. His main problem was he didn't know what the character should look like, so he thought about it for a few days, and then he went home and ate a pizza. After eating the first slice, he looked down, and staring back up at him was a side-on round head with an open mouth, the perfect shape for his Puckman. Cold.
This was the first time that what you controlled in a video game wasn't simply a spaceship or a blob or a tennis bat. And so it was the beginning of video game character design being able to draw you in to identification with the game.
When it came to releasing the game in the US, Midway Manufacturing, the US distributor, were more than happy to introduce it to the States, but they were slightly concerned about the title Puckman. Their main concern stemmed from the fact that because the cabinet was black and the writing in bright yellow, any teenager with a black marker pen could easily give their prestigious new release a slightly less than flattering title. Puckman. The name was thus changed into the less easy to alter into a rude word title, Pac-Man.
Once invincible Atari has lost £200 million so far this year and sacked 1 in 3 workers.
Suddenly, in 1983, the American video game industry hit a brick wall.
Not since 1929 has an industry fallen so far, so fast. In this neighborhood in Florida, the Chuck E. Cheese Video Arcade closed down. Supercade Amusements closed down. And where the Space Odyssey Video Arcade once stood, Dollhouse 3, a strip joint.
Arcades weren't the only ones in trouble. The console market also collapsed. Powerful home computers made machines like Atari's 8-year-old VCS seem prehistoric. On top of this, a glut of terrible games seemed to make it game over for home consoles. But a small Japanese novelty toy maker had other ideas. Nintendo Koppei was founded in 1889 in the ancient imperial capital of Kyoto. For over 80 years it produced traditional Hanafuda playing cards, but in the 1960s it diversified into the novelty toy market. Board games, beam guns and love testers.
Testa, testa, love testa, 愛情テスト, love testa.
In 1974, Nintendo produced its first video game, an electronic version of the traditional Japanese game, Go. But it was in the home console market that Nintendo was to have the biggest impact. The language of a generation changed as Nintendo firmly replaced Atari in the American vocabulary.
It was here in Kyoto at the Nintendo headquarters, which is that building just over there, in 1985 that Shigeru Miyamoto saved the video game industry.
Hello! It's me, Mario!
People warm to Mario because he's the antithesis of the superhero. He's not big and strong and muscular and blonde hair and blue-eyed. He's a short, dumpy Italian fellow with a moustache and a big nose.
Mario is the video game superstar. A survey in the United States in 1989 found that more American children recognized Mario than Mickey Mouse. Mario is far better known than his creator, Shigeru Miyamoto. That is, except in the world of video games, where this former cartoonist is probably even more popular than Jesus.
Miyamoto may be the John Lennon of video games because he brought soul to games.
Everyone looks at the next Miyamoto game to find out, what new things the man has invented.